Sergeant Tatum, we need to discuss the Highway 101 stops.
I've led the interdiction team since 2014.
Brendon Jacy Tatum kept his own records of every stop, every seizure, and every sale. Those records are now Exhibit A, and the falsified report he sent directly to the FBI agent investigating him is the reason he's being arrested right now.
Off-duty seizures, posing as federal agents, selling the marijuana for profit.
I was recognized by the mayor for drug suppression efforts.
Check my service file, $400,000 in proceeds.
The footage you just watched freezes on a 15-year veteran of the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety. But the report told a different story. A 6-page incident summary and a polished press release, both stamped with the seal of his own department, both drafted by Brendon Jacy Tatum himself, both forwarded directly to the FBI agent who was already investigating him. By the time federal prosecutors finished reading those two documents, the decorated drug interdiction sergeant in this footage would owe the government over $500,000 and be on his way to 30 months in federal prison. Before we go any further, have you ever been pulled over and felt like something was not quite right about the stop? The badge looked strange. The unmarked SUV felt off. The officer seemed too eager to skip the paperwork. Drop that story in the comments. I want to read every single one of them. And if you are not subscribed yet, now's the time. We cover cases where the people we were told to trust on site are the ones who should have been watched the closest. Brendon Jacy Tatum was born in 1983 in the small inland city of U.S.C, Mendocino County, California, about an hour north of the highway corridor he would later patrol, and about an hour south of the cannabis-growing communities he would eventually rob. His father worked as a mechanic at a Chevron service station off the Highway 101 exit at Talmadge Road. His mother managed the front office of a dental practice on State Street. Neither had finished college. Both had worked the same job since their 20s, and they raised Brendon and his younger sister in a 2-bedroom rental house with a chain-link fence and a gravel driveway, where his father parked an aging Ford F-150 that always seemed to need one more weekend of work. Brendon was, by every account from his childhood, a polite and average boy. His third-grade teacher at Yokayo Elementary remembered him as quiet, focused, and eager to please. His Little League coach at Anton Stadium said he was the kid who showed up half an hour early to help drag the field. When the local sheriff's deputies came to his elementary school for the DARE program in 5th grade, he asked to keep one of the laminated badge stickers they handed out. He kept that sticker on the corner of his bedroom mirror for the next 6 years. He played outside linebacker on the Ukiah High School junior varsity football team and graduated in 2001 with a 3.1 grade point average and a part-time job stocking shelves at the Raley's grocery store on East Perkins Street. He spent the summer after graduation working 2 jobs, Raley's during the day, bussing tables at a steakhouse near the highway at night. And by September, he had enrolled at Santa Rosa Junior College, where he completed an associate's degree in administration of justice over the following 3 years. In 2005, at 22, he was accepted into the police academy at the Santa Rosa Public Safety Training Center. He graduated 12th in a class of 41 cadets. His evaluators described him as detail-oriented, reliable, and showing strong aptitude for investigative procedures. One instructor wrote that he demonstrates initiative and occasionally needs guidance on protocol, but learns quickly when corrected. On his final tactical exam, he scored a 94, the 3rd highest in his class. His first job in law enforcement was with a small municipal agency in Sonoma County, where he spent 18 months on graveyard patrol. The work was steady. Domestic disturbances, drunk drivers, the occasional burglary alarm at a strip mall on Industrial Drive. But Brendon wanted more. In 2007, he applied to the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety, an unusual agency in California that combined police and fire functions under a single command. He passed the written exam on the first attempt, completed a polygraph, sat for 3 rounds of oral interviews, and was sworn in as Officer Tatum on October 14, 2007, at a small ceremony inside the City Council chambers. He was 24 years old. His starting salary was $58,400. The young officer's evaluations during his first 3 years on patrol were uniformly positive. His sergeants noted that he consistently meets expectations, works well independently, and shows strong leadership potential. In 2010, he was assigned to the department's Traffic Enforcement Division, where he developed a reputation for high-quality stops, meaning the kind of pretextual traffic encounter that frequently turns up drugs in the trunk, cash in the door panel, or a passenger with an active warrant. By the end of that year, he had personally accounted for 14% of the agency's narcotics arrests. In 2012, he was promoted to corporal. In 2013, he was promoted to sergeant. And in early 2014, at the age of 31, he was named the lead supervisor of the department's newly formed drug interdiction team, a small unit of 3 to 4 officers tasked with patrolling Highway 101 between Cloverdale and Rohnert Park, the long stretch of asphalt that connected the cannabis-producing counties of Mendocino and Humboldt to the markets of the Bay Area. His wife, they had married in 2011 at a vineyard in Healdsburg, was a registered nurse at Sutter Santa Rosa Regional Hospital. They bought a 4-bedroom house in a quiet cul-de-sac in northwest Santa Rosa in 2013 for $462,000. Their first daughter was born in 2014. Their son was born in 2016. Neighbors described them as private but friendly. Tatum coached his daughter's preschool soccer team for 1 season. He kept the lawn mowed. He waved at the mailman. He was, on every visible level, exactly the kind of man a community trusts to enforce its laws. Highway 101 is the spine of California's North Coast. It runs from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco north to the Oregon border, and for the 80-mile stretch between Cloverdale in Sonoma County and the southern edge of Humboldt County, it cuts directly through what was, for decades, the most productive cannabis-growing region in the United States. The Emerald Triangle, Mendocino, Humboldt, and Trinity counties produced an estimated 60% of the marijuana sold in California in the years before legalization. And every pound of it, whether destined for a dispensary or a black market buyer, eventually had to travel south down Highway 101 to reach the cities where the customers lived. For a drug interdiction officer, the math was simple. Stop enough vehicles on the right stretch of road, develop probable cause through nervous behavior or a minor traffic violation, deploy a K-9 if available, and the cars themselves would deliver the seizures. Between 2013 and 2018, the Rohnert Park drug interdiction team, the team Brendon Tatum supervised, oversaw the confiscation of at least 2.5 tons of marijuana and $3.6 million in cash under California's civil asset forfeiture laws. Civil asset forfeiture is a legal mechanism that allows law enforcement to seize property believed to be connected to criminal activity, even when no criminal charge is ever filed against the owner. The seized cash and assets are then channeled through a sometimes opaque process into the budgets of the seizing agencies. For a small department like Rohnert Park, a city of just over 40,000 residents, the revenue generated by interdiction stops on Highway 101 was meaningful. It paid for new equipment. It funded overtime. It justified the existence of the unit itself. The system had structural vulnerabilities that anyone working inside it would have understood. The interdiction unit operated outside the routine oversight that applied to in-uniform patrol. Officers worked in plain clothes. They drove unmarked vehicles. They were not required to activate body-worn cameras during stops conducted off-duty or outside city jurisdiction. They controlled the chain of custody on the drugs and cash they seized. They drafted the reports that described what had happened. They decided what was logged into evidence and what was destroyed. And in 2014, when Brendon Tatum took over the unit, he became the single point of approval for nearly every step in that chain. Cannabis growers traveling Highway 101 with product in their vehicles knew the law was against them. Until 2018, recreational possession of more than an ounce of marijuana remained a criminal offense in California, and possession with intent to distribute was a felony. A grower pulled over with 47 pounds of cannabis in his truck had every incentive to comply, to apologize, to negotiate, to walk away from the contraband rather than fight the charge. The interdiction unit knew this. The system was designed around it, and Sergeant Tatum, with 5 years on the road and a sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, knew it better than anyone. The operation began, according to prosecutors, sometime in the second half of 2014, within months of Tatum's promotion to interdiction supervisor. The first documented illicit stop took place in October of that year on a quiet stretch of Highway 101, just south of the Sonoma-Mendocino County line, well outside Rohnert Park's jurisdiction. Tatum was off duty. He was out of uniform. He was driving an unmarked black SUV. With him was Officer Joseph Huffaker, a fellow Rohnert Park officer who had been assigned to the interdiction team. Both men carried badges. Both men carried sidearms. Neither man was wearing a body camera. The method, repeated across dozens of stops over the next 3 years, followed a consistent pattern. Tatum and Huffaker would identify a vehicle they suspected of carrying cannabis, often based on a license plate from one of the Emerald Triangle counties, sometimes based on a tip from an informant, occasionally based on nothing more than instinct honed by hundreds of legitimate stops. They would pull the driver over. They would identify themselves as federal agents, variously at different stops as ATF agents or as DEA agents, and they would demand to search the vehicle. If the driver hesitated, they threatened immediate arrest under federal law. If the driver complied, they took whatever marijuana was in the vehicle, walked back to the unmarked SUV, and drove away. No paperwork was filed. No receipt was provided. No federal agency was ever involved. The drivers, often growers carrying the cash equivalent of months of labor, watched 2 men in plain clothes load their cannabis into the back of an unmarked SUV and disappear south on the highway. Most never reported the encounter. Many believed in the moment that they had been legitimately searched by federal agents. Some assumed the marijuana was being destroyed. None of them imagined what was actually happening next. What was happening next was a side business. According to Tatum's own admissions in his plea agreement, the marijuana seized in these off-duty stops was not destroyed. It was not logged into the Rohnert Park evidence room. It was instead sold, moved through a network of buyers in the Bay Area and Sacramento markets, converted into cash, and deposited into a bank account Tatum shared with his wife. The amounts were not small. One named victim, Mendocino County cannabis grower Huidell Freeman, has stated publicly that he was stopped in 2016 and had 47 pounds of marijuana taken from him. At the going wholesale rate of $1,500 per pound at the time, that single seizure represented over $70,000 in product. Another named victim, Humboldt County resident Barron Lutz, testified that 23 pounds of designer cannabis, strains including Agent Orange and Serendipity, were taken from him by two officers in an unmarked black SUV who identified themselves as ATF agents and refused to provide an inventory receipt. The scheme escalated. By 2015, Tatum was no longer satisfied with what he could take on the highway. According to his own admissions, between 2015 and 2016, he began stealing marijuana directly from the Rohnert Park police station's own evidence supply, walking into his own department's evidence storage, signing out drugs that had been seized legitimately by other officers, and removing them without logging the disposition. The drugs went the same place the highway seizures went, into the resale network, and eventually into the joint bank account. The signs were there for anyone willing to look. In 2015, Tatum purchased a $46,000 Bayliner trophy fishing boat with a twin-engine setup, paid for largely in cash. He did not report the purchase on his tax returns. He did not disclose the source of the funds. His official salary as a Rohnert Park sergeant was approximately $108,000 per year, including overtime. The boat, the cash deposits, the unaccounted assets, none of it matched the salary on paper. None of it was flagged. And then, in 2016, something happened that should have ended his career on its own. The Sonoma County District Attorney's Office placed Brendon Tatum on its Brady list, the official roster of law enforcement officers whose credibility issues are so significant that prosecutors are required to disclose them to defense attorneys in any case the officer touches. The Brady List designation does not mean an officer has been convicted of anything. It means that the prosecutors who would have to put him on a witness stand have determined that he cannot be trusted as a witness, without that fact being shared with the defense. The Brady listing in 2016 should have triggered a serious internal review. It did not. The same year his credibility was being formally questioned by his county's chief prosecutor, the city of Rohnert Park honored him publicly. In a 2015 ceremony at City Hall, a year before the Brady listing, the mayor of Rohnert Park had formally recognized Tatum for his outstanding drug suppression efforts and presented him with a commendation. He stood at the podium in his dress uniform. His wife was in the audience. The local newspaper ran a photograph the next day. The interdiction unit kept operating. Tatum kept supervising it, and the off-duty stops on Highway 101 continued. In January 2017, the state of California legalized recreational cannabis under Proposition 64. Possession of small amounts became legal for adults. Licensed cultivation and distribution became regulated industries with a tax structure and a permitting process. The premise of the interdiction unit, that cannabis transport on Highway 101 represented a criminal enterprise requiring federal-style enforcement, became, almost overnight, a relic of a previous era. The Rohnert Park Drug Interdiction Unit was formally disbanded in early 2017. The off-duty stops did not stop. They continued through 2017, into a legal landscape where the very growers being robbed were now operating in a partially legal market and had every reason to report what was happening to them. The momentum of the prior decade carried Tatum and Huffaker forward, even as the ground beneath the operation shifted. They kept driving north in the unmarked SUV. They kept pulling over trucks with Mendocino and Humboldt plates. They kept identifying themselves as federal agents. They kept walking away with cannabis they did not log. The catalyst arrived in February 2018. A citizen, a driver who had been pulled over on Highway 101 the previous December and had cannabis seized by two men claiming to be federal agents, picked up the phone and called the FBI. The call landed at the FBI's San Francisco field office. The agent who took the report, a federal investigator with experience in public corruption cases, Listen to the driver's account. A December 2017 stop, an unmarked SUV, two men in plain clothes who had identified themselves as ATF agents, a seizure of cannabis, no receipt, no paperwork, no follow-up. The agent ran the date and the location through state and federal databases. There was no record of an ATF stop on Highway 101 in December 2017. There was no federal seizure. There was no federal case. There was, however, a Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety incident report associated with that stretch of highway on a date close to the one the driver had given. The agent pulled the report. It described a routine traffic stop. It did not match the driver's account in any meaningful way. The agent did what federal agents do when local police reports do not match civilian complaints. He reached out to the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety. He requested additional documentation. He asked specifically for the police report covering the December 2017 stop on Highway 101. The request landed on Brendon Tatum's desk. For 3.5 years, Tatum had been operating with the confidence of a man who controlled his own paper trail. Every report he wrote was a report he wrote. Every disposition he logged was a disposition he logged. Every seizure he conducted was a seizure he conducted. The interdiction unit was his unit. The reports were his reports. The system, for him, had no external check until that February morning when an FBI agent sent him an email asking for one specific report on one specific stop. He had a choice. He could have called a lawyer. He could have refused to respond. He could have invoked his Fifth Amendment rights. He could have walked away from the desk and told the FBI to come back with a subpoena. He could have done what any defense attorney in the country would have advised him to do. He did none of those things. Instead, he sat down with Joseph Huffaker, and the two of them drafted a falsified police report and a falsified press release describing the December 2017 stop. They wrote the report to look like the kind of legitimate interdiction stop a real interdiction officer would have made. They added a press release for credibility, a document of the kind a department might issue to publicize a successful seizure. They signed both documents. They stamped them with the seal of the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety. And Tatum, the sergeant, forwarded both documents directly to the FBI agent who was investigating him. The fabricated paperwork was meant to make the inquiry go away. It did the opposite. The moment the false report landed in the agent's inbox, the FBI had something they had not had before, a federal felony, fully documented, with Tatum's name on the cover page. We are heading into the federal investigation now. Before we do, if this case has kept your attention this far, that is because the betrayal of trust here goes deeper than almost any case we have covered. The man you are watching was not a corrupt rookie cut adrift from his department. He was the supervisor. He was the man who set the standard for the unit he ran. Subscribe if you have not yet. We break down every detail of how these schemes actually unravel, and what we cover next will not be on the local news either. Stick around. The FBI's investigation, once Tatum's falsified report hit the agent's desk, moved on two parallel tracks. The first track was the document itself. Federal investigators began pulling every police report and press release Tatum had authored over the prior 4 years. They compared dates, locations, vehicle descriptions, and signature blocks. They identified inconsistencies, stops described in reports that no civilian had ever filed a complaint about, stops described by civilians that no report had ever been written about, dispositions of seized property that did not match either the report or the evidence room logs. The second track was the victims. federal agents began canvassing the cannabis-growing communities of Mendocino and Humboldt counties. The very communities Tatum's unit had been targeting for years. They drove up Highway 101. They knocked on doors. They spoke to growers, to dispensary operators, to drivers who had made the run south with product. They asked a simple question. Had anyone been stopped by men in an unmarked vehicle who identified themselves as federal agents and refused to provide a receipt? The answers came back faster than the agents expected. One grower described a stop near Hopland in 2015. Another described a stop near Cloverdale in 2016. Hudell Freeman described his 47-pound seizure. Barron Lutz described his 23-pound seizure of Agent Orange and Serendipity strains. The pattern was unmistakable. 2 men, an unmarked black SUV, plain clothes. Badges flashed but never displayed for long. A claim of federal authority. A seizure without paperwork. By the time federal agents executed search warrants on Tatum's home, his vehicles, and his financial records in 2019, they had a parallel evidentiary structure built from 3 independent sources. The falsified documents Tatum himself had created and forwarded to the FBI. The testimony of dozens of victims across 2 counties spanning 4 years of stops, and the financial records showing over $400,000 in unexplained deposits running through the joint bank account Tatum shared with his wife. The financial records were the third pillar. Investigators traced cash deposits, money orders, and small business expenditures that did not match Tatum's declared income. The $46,000 Bayliner Trophy fishing boat, purchased in 2015 with funds that never appeared on a tax return, became Exhibit A for the tax evasion count that would eventually be filed. The IRS calculated unreported income exceeding $278,000. Forfeiture proceedings against an additional $198,000 in identified illicit proceeds were initiated. And then there were the text messages and communications between Tatum and Huffaker. Federal investigators recovered exchanges discussing seizures, discussing buyers, discussing the disposition of cannabis after it left the highway. One exchange, recovered from a backup of an older device, captured the tone of the operation in 5 lines. Huffaker, October 2016. How much did the last guy have? Tatum, 47. Huffaker, Jesus, what's that worth? Tatum, about 70 retail, less for us obviously. Huffaker, when can we move it? Tatum, Sunday, I'll talk to our guy. Another exchange, from spring 2017, months after the interdiction unit had been officially disbanded. Tatum, heading up tomorrow, you in? Huffaker, yeah, meet at the usual. Tatum, plate I'm watching for is a white Silverado, Mendo plates. The communications spanned years. The financial records corroborated the communications. The victims corroborated the financial records. The falsified report Tatum had sent to the FBI corroborated everything. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning in 2019 at the Tatum residence in northwest Santa Rosa. 2 FBI agents and 1 IRS special agent arrived at the front door at 6:47 in the morning with a federal search warrant. Tatum answered the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants. His wife was upstairs. Their daughter was getting ready for kindergarten. The lead agent introduced himself and presented the warrant. He explained the scope of the search, the residence, the vehicles, the boat parked on a trailer in the side yard, the financial records, the personal electronic devices. He explained Tatum's rights. He asked if Tatum understood. Tatum understood. He stood in the doorway of his own house, the morning light coming in over his shoulder, his wife's footsteps on the staircase behind him, and he answered with a single sentence. "I know what this is about." The agent asked him to elaborate. "I would like to speak with my attorney before I say anything else." The agent searched the house for the next 6 hours. They removed 2 desktop computers, 3 laptops, 4 cellular phones, a tablet, and several external hard drives. They photographed the boat. They seized financial documents from a filing cabinet in the home office. They removed cash from a small safe in the master bedroom closet. The cash, when later counted, totaled just over $27,000. Tatum did not say another word to the agents that day. He did not resist. He did not argue. He sat at his own kitchen table while the search continued, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes on the wall. His wife sat beside him for part of it, then went upstairs, then came back down. The daughter was taken to school by a neighbor. The son napped through most of the search. Before the agents left, the lead investigator handed Tatum a card with a federal grand jury subpoena date written on the back. He walked back to the unmarked sedan parked at the curb. The neighbors had begun to gather at the edges of the cul-de-sac. By noon, every house on the street knew that something had happened at the Tatum residence. By that evening, the local news had it. The Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety placed Tatum on administrative leave the following day. He never returned to active duty. He never wore the uniform again. The federal indictment came down in 2020. Brendon Jacy Tatum was charged with conspiracy to commit extortion under color of official, right under the Hobbs Act, falsification of records in a federal investigation, and tax evasion. The maximum sentence on the extortion charge alone was 20 years in federal prison. His defense attorney was Christopher Wing, a former federal prosecutor from a San Francisco firm. The defense strategy in the early months of the case centered on challenging the chain of evidence, the gaps in the falsified report, the absence of body camera footage from off-duty stops, the question of whether civilian witnesses would hold up under cross-examination at trial. The strategy did not survive contact with the evidence. By the fall of 2021, after months of grand jury testimony and pre-trial motions, the government's case had become overwhelming. The falsified report Tatum had forwarded to the FBI was, by itself, a federal felony with his name on the signature line. The financial records were irrefutable. The communications with Huffaker were recovered, authenticated, and ready for trial. In December 2021, Brendon Tatum walked into the federal courthouse in San Francisco and pleaded guilty. He stood before a magistrate judge in a Navy suit, his attorney to his left, an assistant United States attorney to his right, and he entered guilty pleas on 3 federal counts: conspiracy to commit extortion under color of official right, falsification of records in a federal investigation, tax evasion. In the 4 years between the guilty plea and the sentencing, Tatum cooperated. His co-defendant, Joseph Huffaker, declined to plead and instead went to trial in 2025. Tatum testified at that trial. He sat in the witness chair in the same federal courthouse where he had entered his own plea 4 years earlier, and he answered questions from the prosecution about the stops, the seizures, the resale network, the falsified report, the joint bank account, the fishing boat. The jury convicted Huffaker on the federal extortion count. On May 6, 2026, Brendon Jacy Tatum returned to the same federal courthouse one final time for sentencing. United States District Judge Maxine M. Chesney presided. The courtroom was small. The gallery held members of Tatum's family, members of the press, and 2 of the named victims, Hudell Freeman and Barron Lutz, who had asked to be present. The Assistant United States Attorney spoke first. He laid out the conduct. He described the off-duty stops, the impersonation of federal agents, the seizures without receipts, the resale of cannabis through a private network, the theft from the department's own evidence supply, the $400,000 in illicit proceeds, the fishing boat, the unreported income, the falsified report sent directly to the investigating FBI agent. He asked for a sentence at the high end of the guidelines. The defense responded. Counsel argued for leniency based on Tatum's cooperation, his testimony against Huffaker, his lack of prior criminal record, his service to the community in the years before the interdiction unit, and the impact a prison sentence would have on his children, now 12 and 10 years old. Then the victim spoke. Hudell Freeman addressed the court for nearly 10 minutes. He described the 2016 stop. He described the moment two men in plain clothes told him they were federal agents and demanded he hand over 47 pounds of cannabis or face arrest. He described not knowing, for 2 years afterward, whether his cannabis had been destroyed by a federal agency or whether it had simply been stolen. He described what $70,000 represented to a grower in Mendocino County, a year of labor, a year of risk, a year of expenses. He said he had voted for cannabis legalization in 2016 because he believed it would protect growers like him. He said he had not anticipated being robbed just months later by the police who had been sworn to honor that vote. Barron Lutz spoke next. He described the unmarked black SUV. He described the two officers identifying themselves as ATF agents. He described the loss of 23 pounds of designer cannabis, strains he had spent years developing. He said he had not slept well for months after the stop. He said he had thought for a long time that he must have done something wrong. He said it had taken the FBI knocking on his door to make him understand that he had done nothing wrong at all. Judge Chesney delivered her sentencing statement before pronouncing the sentence. She addressed the betrayal of public trust at the heart of the case. She noted that Tatum had not been a rookie officer, not a man under duress, not someone with mitigating circumstances of poverty or coercion. He had been a sworn sergeant, a supervisor, a man entrusted with leading a team whose entire purpose was the lawful enforcement of drug laws. He had converted that authority into a private enterprise. He had robbed the very citizens he had sworn to protect. And when an FBI agent had finally come asking questions, he had compounded the crime by manufacturing an official record to obscure it. "You held," the judge said, "an unusual concentration of power. You decided who got pulled over. You decided what got searched. You decided what got seized. And you decided how the report read afterward. That is the trust the people of California placed in you. You betrayed every part of it." She sentenced him to 30 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, restitution totaling $301,145.70, a separate IRS restitution order of approximately $278,000, and forfeiture of an additional $198,000 tied to the tax evasion charges. He was ordered to surrender to the Federal Bureau of Prisons on January 11, 2027. His co-defendant, Joseph Huffaker, sentenced in the same hearing, received 20 months. Brendon Tatum will report to a low-security federal facility. He will serve roughly 2.5 years. He will be released in his late 40s, into a world that no longer needs a Highway 101 drug interdiction sergeant. A world where the cannabis he stole from growers is now sold legally in storefronts up and down the very corridor he once patrolled. A world where the badge he wore for 15 years has been retired into a federal evidence locker alongside the falsified report that finally ended his career. This case was brazen. But the case on the right-hand side of your screen right now is on a different level entirely. Click it now.